Hey guys, tonight we're heading to a smoky courtyard in ancient Athens, where ceramic dust sticks to your sandals, pottery wheels spin with a soft whir, and the smell of wet clay competes with roasting olives from a nearby stand. The sun's dipping low, gilding the city's rooftops and temple stones. But there's a different kind of tension in the air, one that even the gods are whispering about. You're here for a pottery contest. Sounds harmless, right? A little bowl making, some paint. A maybe too serious debate about whether orange is the new black figure style. But tonight, there's a twist. Athena. Yes, that Athena is here, and she's not watching. She's competing. Why? Well, she claims it's just a friendly gesture to support the arts. But let's be honest. This is the same goddess who once turned a mortal into a spider over a weaving contest, so you probably won't survive this one if you sneeze near her glaze bucket. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start on the outskirts of the agora, watching torchbearers hang oil lamps along the walls of a sun-baked workshop courtyard. There's a murmur in the crowd, not panicked, just curious, like they've shown up expecting jugs and bowls. But someone whispered a goddess is entering the competition. And that's not just gossip. Because there she is, Athena, in mortal disguise. She's wearing a dusty tunic, her trademark helmet exchanged for a linen head wrap. A few eagle-eyed Athenians squint at her and go, that's not how wrists move unless you've trained in divine battle stance. But no one calls her out. Yet, she strolls past a kiln with the practiced grace of someone who's invented a dozen arts and improved on 24 more. Her gaze lingers on the clay amphorae laid out to dry. Some wobble slightly, others are decorated with zigzag fish or lazy minotaurs. She hums softly and makes a mental note. No one hears a threat. Probably, except one. You see him polishing the vase that looks ready to receive an award and a poem about its symmetry. This is Thun, son of Damocles, third-generation potter and full-time braggart. His latest claim to fame, a crater that allegedly made Pericles weep with joy. Historians still argue whether that was joy or mild heat stroke. Thun's work is undeniably excellent. His neck amphorae are smooth, his black figure detailing precise, and he signs each piece with a flourish and a slightly insulting caricature of a rival. You watch him glance at Athena's table with a smirk. There's no way he knows who she is. He just assumes she's a nobody from Boeotia trying to bluff her way into elite craftsmanship. You shuffle along the edge of the courtyard as the contest officially begins. A crier with a cracked bell summons everyone. Competitors, judges, and curious pigeons. The rules. Each potter must produce one functional vessel and decorate it with a scene of their choosing, bonus points for mythological themes. Athena arches one divine eyebrow. Oh, it's on. The contest commences, and the courtyard bursts into motion. You hear the slap of clay on wood, the grind of turning wheels, the occasional shriek when someone drops a nearly finished vase. A donkey brays in the background. Totally irrelevant, but somehow it adds to the ambiance. Athena, now calling herself Althea, begins to mold a large, shallow kylix. She works quietly, methodically, as if her hands already know the shape hiding inside the clay. Occasionally, she wipes her palms on her apron and glances sideways at Thun. He's sculpting a massive crater with exaggerated handles. Look at me. I made handles for Hercules. As the evening deepens, the workshop fills with the scent of smoke, sweat, and anxious ambition. You lean against a pillar and try not to get powdered in clay dust. A young apprentice spills a whole pot of slip and promptly gets chased by a flustered teacher holding a brush like a dagger. It's chaotic. It's competitive. It's incredibly human. And right in the middle of it, a goddess is hunched over a spinning wheel, humming under her breath and forming a masterpiece, not because she needs to, but because someone dared to act like mortals' own arts. By the time the first round ends, everyone's covered in gray smudges and exhaustion. You glance at Athena's kylix. It's understated, clean, perfectly balanced. She's painted a calm, Small scene, no war, no gods, just a mortal woman offering olive oil to a seated stranger. You blink. It looks suspiciously like Athena herself, receiving a gift from a mortal who doesn't know who she is. Subtle flex. Meanwhile, Thune has drawn an epic battle involving Zeus, a lion, and some questionable anatomical choices that we won't describe in detail. He unveils it with a flourish and a smirk the size of Mount Parnassus. You sense trouble brewing. You've barely shaken the kiln dust from your sleeves when the murmurs begin. Whispers dart like alley cats from one side of the courtyard to the other, weaving between drying racks and amphora stands. Did you see Thune's vase? She painted a servant offering olive oil. Why is that one glowing a little? You shift closer to the table where Thune now stands, basking in the lamplight like a hero returned from war. His vase. If you can call a half-barrel of baked clay with wings for handles, a vase is front and center, surrounded by a slow orbit of impressed and semi-concussed admirers. It's huge. It's dramatic. It's, well, let's be polite and say it's very narrative forward. The painting on the crater shows Zeus in full rage mode, hurling thunderbolts while riding a lion. Behind him, Athena herself appears, hair wild, sword drawn. Either helping or yelling at him, it's hard to say. There's also a centaur playing the lyre for some reason. And yes, if you squint, that centaur looks suspiciously like Thune. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. Greek pottery wasn't just dishware, it was storytelling. Before TikTok and bedtime history podcasts, you got your visual drama right on your soup bowl. Myth scenes were common, with artists choosing familiar tales. Heracles, Odysseus, Dionysus, at parties to showcase skill and cleverness. Thune knows that. He's not subtle, but he's playing to the crowd. Athena, meanwhile, is crouched in the corner rechecking the temperature of her second firing. She hasn't said a word, but she's watching Thune the way a lion watches a gazelle in flip-flops. You wander over to get a closer look at her kylix. It's modest in size, but absurd in execution. The balance is flawless. The figures are soft but precise. The scene, as you saw earlier, is quiet. A woman kneeling, offering a simple clay vessel to a hooded stranger seated under an olive tree. And here comes the quirky tidbit. If you look at that same kylix under angled torchlight, a second scene emerges, a hidden layer painted with a mineral-based slip only visible in low light. It shows the hooded figure transforming just slightly into Athena. The lines are subtle, as if whispering. You almost caught it. No one else notices this yet, but you do. Meanwhile, Thune's ego has become loud enough to require its own name and citizenship. He gestures grandly, reliving each brushstroke of his masterpiece like he's reading battle poetry. See how the lion's mane represents divine chaos, he declares, without a shred of irony. And the centaur note the boldness. The resemblance he represents the artisan himself, singing the gods into motion. You stifle a yawn. One older potter nearby scratches his beard and mutters, "Looks like someone dropped a stew on a statue." You edge closer. This man is Demophon, Thune's mentor, or former mentor, judging by the look on his face, his own submission. A graceful amphora depicting Persephone picking flowers sits ignored beside Thune's drama vessel. He seems fine with that, maybe a little tired, maybe a little amused. It's a lot of lion for a wine jug, he adds, almost to himself. Now here comes the twist. While Thune's showmanship grows, Athena disappears, vanishes mid-crowd. No one sees her go. You find her again in the back workshop, cleaning a sponge in a cracked basin. Her disguise is still intact linen wrap, smudged tunic, but her eyes gleam with that Olympian spark that says, "I could destroy you." But I'm being very polite right now. She notices you. Mortals don't often paint silence, she says without preamble. Her voice is low, matter of fact, like a librarian describing a weather system. They like their stories loud, their heroes bigger than their bowls. You nod because, honestly, what are you going to do? Argue with the goddess of wisdom, she continues. But the smallest acts hold the most shape. We confuse stillness with weakness. Then she frowns, and sometimes we have to prove we invented pottery just to stop someone from adding 6 handles to a soup pot. You like her. Back in the courtyard, Thune is now holding a lecture, not invited, just decided. He's explaining his choice of subject matter to a crowd of mildly trapped listeners, gesturing at the lion like it personally endorsed him. A small boy tugs his mother's sleeve and whispers, "Why is there a naked man fighting a goat on the back?" The mother looks like she deeply regrets bringing her child. Athena finally returns quietly. She lifts her kylix, now cool, and places it beside the others for judging. No speech, no posturing, just a faint smile that says, "Mine tells a whole story without anyone yelling." Historians still argue whether this tale was ever told widely, or whether it lingered in the back alleys of myth like a whispered in-joke among clever artisans. There's no record in Hesiod or Homer, no grand epic that sings the praises of the day. Athena entered a pottery contest just to roast a mortal ego. But you're starting to think those are the best kinds of stories. The quiet ones. The ones you find hidden under glaze and silence. The first judge taps his staff on the flagstone. "Bring forth your vessels," he calls, "and may the clay speak true." And oh, it will. You shift closer as the judging begins, standing somewhere between a dangerously top-heavy vase and a stack of amphora that look like they might collapse under the weight of their own ambition. The crowd has arranged itself in a loose circle around the presentation table, where the day's clay creations await their fate. Every potter's hands are dusted white and twitching, with a mix of pride and barely concealed panic except for Athena, who is now quietly chewing a sprig of bay leaf like it's gum. First up is a modest hydria with a pleasant fish motif well-balanced, competent, but destined to be politely overlooked. A judge murmurs something about solid execution, which is the ancient Greek equivalent of a participation trophy. Then comes a wine jug with wildly uneven handles, prompting another judge to cough pointedly while the potter quietly wishes for spontaneous invisibility. But then, Thune steps forward. He lifts his crater with both hands and deposits it onto the judging table like a sacred offering. If sacred offerings came with thunderbolts, lions, and an alarming number of centaur limbs, he clears his throat and launches into a pre-rehearsed monologue that definitely breaks the no speeches rule, but no one's stopping him. Probably because the judges are stunned into silence. This piece, he begins, is titled Zeus Unleashed, and it captures the moment the Father of Gods descends in righteous fury to rebalance the cosmos. He pauses, waits for gasps. None come, but he soldiers on. Note the dynamic tension in the musculature, the narrative symmetry, the emotional chiaroscuro. You try not to laugh. Emotional chiaroscuro sounds like something someone might whisper to justify a bad tattoo. Still, the vase is undeniably impressive in its size, detail, and sheer audacity. The glaze is crisp, the images bold, and the composition, while chaotic, does have a certain frenzied charm. One judge scribbles something that looks suspiciously like lion, eels, too much. Athena, sorry. Althea waits patiently, arms folded, expression unreadable. When her turn comes, she doesn't step forward or wave. She simply lifts her kylix and places it on the table, silent as moonlight. The judges lean in. At first, they seem underwhelmed. It's small, simple. The painting is delicate, the scene mundane. A woman kneeling, a stranger sitting beneath a tree. But then, one of the older judges squints. He leans in closer, tilts the cup under the flickering torchlight, and inhales softly. You see it too, the hidden second layer, just faint enough to vanish in bright light, just clear enough to shimmer in flame. The seated stranger shifts subtly into divine form. The olive tree darkens like it's blooming in night, and the woman becomes more than mortal, perhaps a priestess, perhaps Athena herself offering humility to another. It's quiet, it's humble, it's magic. The judges exchange glances. One nods, another frowns thoughtfully. A third scribbles something and scratches it out twice. You can almost hear the scales tipping. That's when it happens. The misunderstanding that ignites the entire fiasco. A young apprentice, bustling to clear space for the next piece, trips over a loose stone and accidentally elbows Thune's crater. It wobbles. A collective gasp. He reaches out too late and it tips, landing with an earth-shaking crash that sends clay flying in all directions like terracotta confetti. The courtyard freezes. Even the donkey stops chewing. Thune lets out a noise that starts as a gasp and becomes a growl. He rounds on the apprentice. but the poor kid is already crying and trying to back away. Then Thune turns toward Athena's kylix, still perfectly intact, still glowing softly in the torchlight. He steps closer, eyes narrowing. That's not just glaze, he says. A few nearby potters shift uncomfortably. Athena straightens, still in mortal disguise. It's clay and patience, she replies, voice calm. Thune jabs a finger at the kylix. No one paints like that. Not you. Who are you really? And this is when things escalate. In true Greek myth fashion, from minor misunderstanding to mythological showdown, before anyone can blink, Thune grabs a chunk of broken crater and storms toward the olive press on the edge of the courtyard. You want symbolism. He shouts, here's mine. He hurls the shard into a vat of freshly pressed olive oil, completely ruining a whole amphora's worth of liquid gold. You can almost hear the gods collectively wince. That's when Athena sighs. Deep, slow, cosmic. She removes the linen head wrap, and the air shifts. The smell of bay leaves sharpens. The shadows lean toward her, and her eyes, oh, those eyes, they blazes like twin hearths that know how many wars you've started over dinner. A chorus of gasps. One judge faints. Another just drops his stylus and walks away like he's clocking out forever. Because yes, she is Athena, not Althea, not some dusty student, and now everyone knows it. Thune, in a moment of tragic bravery or extreme denial, points a shaky finger. This was supposed to be a contest of mortals, he sputters. You cheated? You're a goddess. Athena steps forward, clay dust still on her fingers. I created pottery, she says softly. You borrowed it. The crowd doesn't cheer, doesn't breathe. It just stands there, very still, like a painting waiting to be glazed. And Thune? Oh, Thune doesn't back down. He does what no one expects. He demands a rematch. You'd think, under normal mortal logic, that challenging a goddess to a rematch would result in immediate vaporization or at least a strongly worded thunderclap. But instead, there's silence. Thune stands there, red-faced and trembling, his tunic askew and olive oil dripping from his sandal. His ruined crater lies in elegant fragments across the flagstones, like the shattered remains of his self-esteem. And Athena, tall and composed, still dusted in the same clay as everyone else, tilts her head ever so slightly. Oh, she says. You can hear a wine cup drop somewhere in the crowd. The donkey resumes chewing, because frankly, he's seen worse. The judges, what's left of them, glance at one another in mute horror. A rematch wasn't part of the schedule. They were supposed to hand out a laurel wreath, drink some diluted wine, and go home. But here we are. This is Greece. This is myth. And myth loves a round two. Very well, Athena finally says, brushing her hands on her apron with the same calm you might use if someone had just challenged you to a spirited game of checkers. Not divine retribution. Thune, somehow encouraged, puffs up like a rooster in a toga. This time, he mutters, we make amphorae. Tall, elegant, functional. None of your sneaky symbolism. You'd think he'd be more polite to a goddess who could turn him into a houseplant. But hubris doesn't listen to reason. It just takes its shirt off and declares it can beat Mount Olympus at arm wrestling. And here comes your mainstream historical fact. Amphorae weren't just decorative, they were vital, used for storing wine, oil, grains, and anything that needed sealing. They were the ancient equivalent of a shipping container, pantry jar, and artisanal hipster bottle all rolled into one. Cities stamped them, families signed them, and potters took immense pride in perfecting their shape. The courtyard resets, sort of. Some people leave, shaking their heads and muttering about divine egos and wasted oils. Others stay, because let's be honest, how often do you get to watch a goddess go full ceramic showdown? Someone rolls out fresh clay. Another apprentice nervously relights a kiln that was supposed to be cooling down. And you find a safe-ish seat behind a pile of broken terracotta and brace for pottery drama. Round 2. This time, Athena starts first. She moves slowly, purposefully, like someone peeling apart time. She wets her hands, centers the clay, and spins the wheel. You've seen professional potters before, gritty, focused, confident, but this is different. She doesn't just shape the amphora. She remembers it. as if the vessel existed in the air already and her fingers are just reminding the clay of its destiny. Thune, meanwhile, attacks his slab with renewed energy and the reckless enthusiasm of someone who's confident that what went wrong last time was not enough lightning. He slaps the clay onto the wheel, begins molding, and starts narrating again. "I'm going classic." He tells no one and everyone. Panathenaic style. Tall neck, sturdy handles, bold base. None of that subtle moral allegory. This one will show the goddess as she really is stern, warlike, maybe with a spear or two, very respectful. Of course, you make a note to check later if excessively flattering depictions of angry deities are considered bribery. Athena doesn't answer. She's painting now, soft brush strokes in mineral slip. And from what you can glimpse, her amphora shows not gods or battles, but craft. Quiet hands pressing olives, a woman teaching her daughter to spin wool, a potter steadying his wheel, not the flash of myth, but the heartbeat of civilization. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some ancient amphorae had secret compartments. Yep, false bottoms where smugglers could tuck contraband or secret scrolls. It's entirely possible that an amphora could store olive oil and your embarrassing poetry collection at the same time. Versatility was key. Back in the contest, the courtyard is heating up again, literally. The kilns are roaring, sweat beads on every forehead, and even the goddess looks a little flushed. But Thune is glistening with triumph. His amphora is nearly finished, and this time, it's gigantic. You're not sure it would even fit in the average doorway. The crowd inches closer as the firing begins. Both amphorae disappear into separate kilns, and the waiting begins. Someone passes around diluted wine. Someone else starts softly playing a lyre, and a few remaining judges huddle near the grape arbor whispering, "Escape plans." Finally, the kilns open. Athena steps forward first. She removes her amphora with a calm grace, placing it gently on the table. It gleams with golden red perfection. The figures clear. The balance divine, literally. It's the kind of amphora that looks like it wants to store wisdom. Thune stumbles up next, grunting under the weight of his absurdly huge creation. It takes 2 apprentices to help lift it. When it thuds onto the table, the entire surface groans, but the glaze holds. The image, Athena in full armor, surrounded by stars and laurels, is bold, loud, heroic, and entirely lacking in subtlety. You glance at Athena's face. No smile, just calm observation. The kind that means she's filing this whole situation into a mental drawer labeled "Mortals Who Learn the Hard Way." The judges are speechless. One tries to speak, chokes on a grape, and sits down. And just as you think the rematch is over, Thune leans forward and says, "But which one is more practical?" You sense the exact moment Athena loses a tiny bit of her patience. There's a hush, a dense hush, the kind that settles over crowds right before lightning strikes or wedding toasts go terribly wrong. You watch as Thune, still panting from hauling his amphora like a gladiator dragging a fallen foe, jabs a finger toward Athena's vessel. "Yours is pretty," he says, and the word pretty hits the courtyard like a curse. But what's it for? "Mine can store 4 gallons of oil and still knock out a burglar." You nearly choke on your watered wine. Several potters visibly wince. One judge mutters something under his breath that sounds suspiciously like, "By Apollo's eyebrows." Athena, of course, doesn't flinch. She stands beside her amphora, now glowing softly in the firelight, hands folded calmly, eyes glittering with something far more potent than divine wrath, sarcastic restraint. "It's not the size," she replies, "but the purpose." Thune, unfortunately, has never been deterred by nuance. He huffs, "Art is supposed to serve people. My amphora is practical, powerful, memorable. Yours is..." He squints. It's like a bedtime story. And there it is. You can feel the courtyard collectively inhale like a sea sponge facing a drought. The donkey stops chewing. The cicadas go mute. Somewhere, a grape falls soundlessly from a vine. And that's when Aphrodite shows up. She glides into the courtyard like she owns the breeze. Hair perfect, sandals spotless, not a speck of dust on her gleaming wrap. She's not here for the competition. She's here because gossip reaches Olympus faster than Hermes with a deadline. She sweeps her gaze across the amphorae, the shattered crater pieces, the judges now pretending to be shrubs, and lands on Athena with a soft, amused smirk. I heard there was pottery and pettiness, she says sweetly. I brought olives. She holds up a delicately carved snack bowl, completely inappropriate for the moment, and entirely on brand. Now, you get your mainstream historical fact. Greek deities didn't just rule over abstract concepts, they represented daily functions, rituals, even social behaviors. Athena wasn't just wisdom. She was practical craft, city planning, and olive oil management. Aphrodite wasn't just love, she was beauty, persuasion, and occasional chaotic meddling at dinner parties. The two goddesses eye each other across the amphora-littered courtyard. You expect sparks, maybe a pomegranate duel, but instead, Aphrodite strolls over to Thune's amphora. She circles it once, tilts her head. It's very literal, she says. Thune straightens, puffing with pride. It's heroic. She leans closer, and the depiction of Athena, very bold, slightly over-muscled. Is that a third bicep? He pales slightly. Then she turns to Athena's amphora. Her brow lifts as she traces the fine brushstrokes, the figures, the layers, the way the light dances across the slip-painted silhouettes of ordinary people doing not-so-ordinary things. Aphrodite hums. Well, I'd put that in my boudoir. Athena finally cracks the faintest smile. It's made for homes, not pedestals. Aphrodite shrugs. Some homes have pedestals. Now, here comes your quirky tidbit. The ancient Greeks used love goddesses like Aphrodite as symbols of fine taste. If she approved of your artwork, your social standing usually improved unless she disapproved, in which case you might end up with frogs in your kitchen and sudden hair loss. Thune stammers. But mine has impact. He points again at Athena's amphora. Hers doesn't even have a narrative climax. Athena raises an eyebrow. Because not every story ends with fire and yelling. You glance around. The audience is silent, transfixed. Even the remaining judges have straightened their robes and started whispering among themselves. One writes something down, possibly a resignation letter. And then, to everyone's surprise, Aphrodite offers advice. She leans on a kiln post, olives forgotten. You know, if you'd asked me before the first round, she says airily, I'd have told you to focus less on thunderbolts and more on mood. Thune blinks. Mood. Yes. Texture. Shape. Intention. People don't remember vases for the gods on them. They remember them for how they made dinner feel. You didn't expect a goddess of seduction to wax poetic about amphora ambiance. But here we are. She sips from her olive bowl, with the smug grace of someone who's never once cracked a pot while washing it. Athena steps beside her amphora. That's the point. Craft isn't for showing off. It's for sharing, for making space, for remembering that quiet hands are the strongest kind. You feel a strange shift ripple through the air. A softening. Even Thune seems momentarily unsure, like his brain just realized he's been arguing with an immortal over kitchenware. Historians still argue. Someone nearby murmurs whether Athena truly meant to compete or if she was trying to teach us something about the way we see labor and beauty. You turn, it's Demophon, the elderly potter who's been watching quietly since the beginning. He steps forward now, kneeling beside both amphorae with a reverence usually reserved for relics or exceptionally good cheese. These are both well-made, he says to the judges, but only one will live in people's homes. Only one makes you want to sit, pour wine, and listen. His hand hovers near Athena's amphora. The judges don't speak. They don't need to. The entire courtyard understands. The moment the old potter's hand hovers near Athena's amphora, a subtle energy shifts through the courtyard. Not a boom, not a flash, just the unmistakable hush of something being decided in a way that doesn't require votes, titles, or trumpet fanfare. Demophon gently places his hand on the amphora's base, careful not to smudge the glaze, and nods. This one, he says, and just like that, it's done. You glance at Thune. He doesn't rage. He doesn't shout. He just stands there, stunned, as if someone siphoned the bravado right out of his lungs and replaced it with the realization that maybe a giant lion-fight-centaur battle wasn't what the people or the gods actually needed. Now, here's your mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greece, judges didn't always follow rigid scorecards. Sometimes, it was about the feeling a piece inspired. Art wasn't just technique, it was atmosphere, connection, a reflection of a moment in time. The best pottery wasn't just seen, it was felt. Aphrodite offers a polite clap and raises her olive bowl like a glass. Well, she says, that's my cue. I'm off to a symposium where they argue about the poetic structure of wine lists. Good luck, mortals. She vanishes, air swirling slightly in her wake, leaving behind the faint smell of roses and minor judgment. Athena doesn't bow, doesn't celebrate. She simply turns to Thun and says, you have talent. But the clay isn't just yours. It remembers every hand that shaped it before you. And now, here comes the quirky tidbit. Some ancient potters believed clay had memory. They'd whisper blessings into it before shaping, hoping the vessel would remember kindness or absorb the mood of its maker. One myth even says particularly stubborn clay came from cursed riverbeds. Thun swallows hard, blinking at his failed amphora like it might apologize if he stares long enough. He doesn't speak, but his shoulders slump a little, and that right there is the start of his humility. Athena picks up her amphora, cradling it like something living. I'm leaving this here, she says to the stunned crowd, for the workshop, for everyone. A few potters gasp, one claps their hand over their mouth. Leaving behind a divine creation wasn't just generous, it was unheard of. She sets it gently onto a central table and brushes a thumb along its rim. Let it remind you that excellence isn't loud, and grace doesn't shout, you blink, and she's gone. Not dramatically, no lightning. No chorus of owls, just not there anymore. Like mist evaporating before sunrise. And suddenly, the courtyard feels very mortal again. The potters start moving again. Quietly. Some examine the amphora up close. Others clean their stations in silence. You overhear someone muttering, we'll have to build a shelf just for that thing. And someone else replying, build a temple while you're at it. The judges, now wide-eyed and utterly exhausted, confer briefly and scrawl something official-looking on a papyrus scroll, probably a revised competition rule. No god-level participants unless clearly disclosed. Now, in a perfect world, the story might end here. But no, because not even the gods can resist a little post-show commentary. Just as things begin to settle, Hermes pops up. You spot him lounging on a half-toppled stack of unused amphorae, flipping a coin and smirking like he's been there the whole time. Which, let's be honest, he probably has. God of travelers, thieves, and casual chaos. He's also the Olympian gossip courier. If Athena was composed dignity, Hermes is pure lounge chair sarcasm. That was amazing, he says to no one and everyone. I haven't seen Thun's ego punctured like that since he tried to trademark the word vase. Thun, overhearing, turns an unfortunate shade of terracotta. Hermes hops down and surveys the scene, giving a little whistle at the broken crater remains. Oof, there goes his Zeus phase. He strolls past Athena's amphora and pauses to admire it properly. Subtle, layered, implied divinity. 10 out of 10 for divine trolling. You stifle a laugh, even the donkey snorts. Now here's your scholarly debate of the day. Historians still argue whether Hermes was genuinely supportive of Athena's interventions or just found them wildly entertaining. Some sources depict him as an ally of cleverness. Others suggest he liked poking egos with a stick and watching them implode. He turns to the remaining crowd and claps his hands. Right. Anyone up for an impromptu workshop on decorative urns with secret compartments? I'll provide the smug anecdotes. A few younger potters nod enthusiastically. One older potter groans and mutters, I knew we shouldn't have fired the good wine first. And just like that, the contest dissolves into storytelling, shared olives, and quiet laughter. Someone produces a lyre. Someone else brings out a jug of something fermented and questionably legal. The amphora sits peacefully in the center, watched but not touched. You sit nearby, watching the firelight flicker off the glazed surface, and realize that somewhere between throne clay and throne shade, you've witnessed a very different kind of myth. One that doesn't end in thunder, but in teaching, in slowing down, in letting silence carry the shape of the story. Because sometimes, the gods don't roar. They whisper through vessels left behind. You sit a while longer near the amphora, sipping something that's probably wine and definitely warm. while the rest of the courtyard slips into that strange post-divine atmosphere where everything feels the same, but you know it's not. Thune has wandered off to sulk in the shadows, not quite banished, but exiled to the part of the evening where people avoid making direct eye contact. His apprentices are awkwardly rearranging paintbrushes nearby, occasionally peeking at Athena's amphora like it might sprout wings and fly away. Which, considering recent events, isn't entirely out of the question. Then you hear the unmistakable squelch of footsteps in sandals too clean for this hour. Hermes is back. He plops down beside you, stretching like a cat that owns 3 villas and a moral loophole. Well, he says, propping his feet on a broken bench. Wasn't that just the world's quietest war? You raise an eyebrow. He grins wider. See, mortals think the gods love shouting and drama. He continues. But honestly, we only yell when people stop listening. Athena, she'd rather outsculpt you than outsword you. And there it is. Your next mainstream historical fact. Athena was revered not just for her wisdom in battle, but her patronage of arts, especially craftsmanship. We're talking textiles, architecture, metallurgy, and yes, pottery. It's said the first wheel-spun vessel was guided by her hands. She wasn't a goddess of things. She was the goddess of making things well. Hermes plucks a fig off someone's unattended snack plate. You know, he says between chews. This kind of showdown happens more often than you'd think. Not always with pots, sometimes with poetry, or looms, or get this one time, with pickled fish. Long story. Very salty. You chuckle, unsure if he's joking. With Hermes, there's a 60% chance he's absolutely serious and a 100% chance he wants you to wonder. Then he leans closer and drops the quirky tidbit. Some say Athena once challenged a mortal to a weaving contest because the mortal claimed to have invented thread patterns. The mortal won? Barely. So Athena invented dye gradients the next day out of pure spite. He leans back again, looking unreasonably pleased with himself. Historians still argue whether that's true, he adds casually, or if it's just what we tell new gods to keep them humble. As the crowd dwindles, a few of the younger potters linger around Athena's amphora. They're whispering, sketching, studying. One of them, a girl no older than 13, traces the base with a careful fingertip, not touching the paint, just observing. Her eyes are wide, shining with the kind of reverence usually reserved for miracles or perfectly ripened peaches. You watch her, and you realize something profound. This is the legacy. Not applause, not awards, not even credit. It's inspiration. The kind that outlives its maker, whispered from one hand to the next, reshaped across time. The amphora will stay here, probably for generations. Potters will model their work on its curves. They'll try to mimic its balance, never quite getting it right. And that will be the point. Because perfect things aren't meant to be duplicated. They're meant to remind you what's possible. Hermes seems to sense your thoughts. You're catching on, he says, flicking fig seeds off his tunic. That's the thing about quiet gods. They don't want followers. They want students. You nod, then pause. Do the gods compete often? You ask. Hermes chuckles. Oh, constantly. But it's not always for glory. Sometimes it's just to nudge mortals forward. A contest is a good excuse to watch you grow. You consider that, it sounds both comforting and vaguely threatening. Besides, he adds with a wink, Athena doesn't need to win. She just needs you to see. Suddenly, one of the younger apprentices calls out. She's found a marking on the inside of the amphora barely visible, but deliberate. A tiny owl etched in the curve of the neck. It's subtle, personal. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was just part of the glaze. Hermes laughs. She always signs her work, just never in the same place twice. You glance toward the amphora again, now surrounded by hushed awe and squinting heads trying to decipher symbolism. Some are arguing about whether the woman kneeling is a mortal offering wisdom or a goddess receiving it, or both. Hermes says, reading your mind, because of course he is. Here's your open scholarly debate. Academics still disagree over whether Athena's artistic representations were primarily aspirational, meant to elevate mortals, or cautionary, serving as a reminder that reaching too far could bring divine correction. Either way, she left her mark not in thunder but in craftsmanship. And somewhere behind you, someone begins humming an old song, a lullaby usually sung while spinning wool or stoking a kiln's fire. It's soft, gentle, completely human. You close your eyes and breathe in the scents of clay, olive oil, and fig. The contest is over, but the echo of it will stretch long after the amphora cools, after the fires dim, after the last storyteller wanders off into the dusk. Because stories don't end. They settle, they steep, like glaze on pottery, waiting for the right light to shimmer. As the lullaby fades and the fire sinks into slow-burning coals, you stretch your legs and wander the courtyard. The amphora gleams under starlight now, its colors softer, more subtle, like it's exhaling after the storm of attention. Hermes is gone again, predictably, leaving behind only a half-eaten fig and a trail of footprints that fade after 5 steps. You suspect he does that on purpose? Keeps mortals guessing. Keeps myths fresh. You meander past the other abandoned vessels, some cracked, some intact, all now irrelevant compared to the goddess's offering. Yet, there's a quiet nobility in them, like stage props after the curtain call. Someone shaped them with care. Even Thune's too much everything crater, lying in fragments, still holds the fingerprints of ambition. A lone apprentice is sweeping up the courtyard. She doesn't notice you. She's humming that same old lullaby, pausing only to peek just once at the amphora, like it might say something if she catches it at the right moment. You decide to help her. Why not? There's something meditative about sweeping up after gods. While you work, a few older potters gather by the well. One of them, hunched and half-blind, is muttering something about the old ways and how it used to be. The others listen, nodding thoughtfully, like they too remember a time before contests had divine guest stars. Now's a good time for a mainstream historical fact. Greek pottery workshops were often communal spaces, where techniques were passed from master to apprentice across generations. A well-trained potter could shape a kylix blindfolded, identify clay sources by taste, and fire a kiln by instinct. But their real genius, knowing when to stop. Ancient potters understood that overworking clay could weaken it. There was power in knowing enough. As you sweep, your mind drifts back to Athena's parting words. The clay isn't just yours. It remembers every hand that shaped it before you. It stays with you, not just as a clever turn of phrase, but as a kind of truth. A reminder that even the smallest acts needing, shaping, firing carry echoes. When you make something with your hands, you're never doing it alone. And here comes your quirky tidbit. In certain rural regions of ancient Greece, it was believed that every household amphora had a spirit, not a soul exactly, but a kind of emotional residue from its maker. If the vessel was made with love, it would preserve oil longer. If it was shaped in anger, it might crack in winter. People whispered blessings into their jugs, sang to them, even apologized to them if they were dropped. You glance around, no one seems surprised by that. Maybe we still do it. That quiet. Sorry, we mumble to a chipped mug. Maybe that's the same instinct, a nod to the invisible thread between human and object. The apprentice finishes sweeping and thanks you with a nod. You nod back, a silent agreement between people who've seen too much tonight and are trying to file it somewhere safe. Then you notice something strange. In the shadows near the broken kiln, a new amphora. It wasn't there before. It's unpainted, still warm. Its base is stamped not with an owl, but with a question mark. You blink, literally. It's a stylized spiral. Not the punctuation mark we know today, but it definitely feels like a question mark. Like it's asking something. Like it wants you to notice. You crouch down to study it, fingers tracing its surface. The shape is clean, but rougher than Athena's work. The clay is thicker, slightly asymmetrical. Human hands made this recently, probably within the last hour, but no one's seen who did it. That's when you hear soft footsteps. Thune. He's standing just behind you, arms crossed, no longer puffed up like a baked peacock. He nods toward the amphora. Mine, he mutters. It's not finished. You stare at him. He looks different, smaller, but steadier, like someone who finally learned how to breathe through his nose. You're leaving it here. You ask. He shrugs. Might as well. Maybe someone will finish it better than me. And there it is. Growth, the most miraculous myth in the whole Greek pantheon. Honestly, Thune, the oversized glory hound with a flair for battlefield pottery, has just admitted he doesn't need to win. He just wants to be part of the story. Historians still argue, you whisper, half to yourself, whether Thune became a famous potter later in life, or if he just quietly taught the next generation and faded into legend. He snorts. They can argue all they want. And with that, he walks off into the courtyard haze, fading between flickering torchlight and the first hints of morning. You stay with the amphora a little longer. Something about it makes you want to shape something too. Not a pot, maybe, but something. A story, a song, a moment worth remembering. As you rise and dust off your hands, you hear one last thing. From nowhere, or everywhere, a quiet voice, familiar as your own heartbeat. You're part of this now. You don't know if it's Athena. You don't need to. Morning doesn't arrive in a rush, it seeps in. Like watered wine through linen. Pale light begins pooling around the amphorae, softening edges, turning cracks into lines of character rather than failure. You've stayed longer than you meant to. Your back aches from sitting on stone steps. Your fingers are streaked with kiln soot. And your mind is full of pottery ghosts. But still you linger. The workshop courtyard is nearly empty now. Only a few potters remain. Too tired to sleep. Too enchanted to leave. The young apprentice from last night has curled up beside a storage jar, her head resting on a rolled cloth. One hand is still smudged with red slip, even in her dreams. She's thinking about clay. You stand up slowly, stretching until your joints sound like old amphorae themselves. There's a strange satisfaction in being tired from watching, as if bearing witness to a divine art duel counts as labor in its own way. Maybe it does. Here's your mainstream historical fact to greet the day. In ancient Greece, potters weren't necessarily revered. They were skilled. Yes, but their work was often anonymous, signed only rarely, and their workshops smelled perpetually of wet earth and charcoal. And yet, over 2,000 years later, those very pots are in museums, while the kings who commissioned them are forgotten. Clay remembers. You wander past Athena's amphora again. Its sheen has dulled slightly with the chill, but its presence hasn't. People keep giving it space, like it's not quite safe to sit too close. Not because it might smite you, but because it might see you. It's the kind of object that reflects more than light. You move on, and there, propped in a shadowed alcove near the outer wall, is something new. Another amphora, smaller, rougher still. This one is painted, badly. The lines wobble, the proportions are all wrong. The figures depicted might be goats, or trees, or people wearing goat costumes. But there's something oddly touching about it. Earnestness disguised as disaster. You peer closer and find a little inscription at the base, written in childlike script, for the goddess. Please don't be mad. You can't help it. You grin. Here's your quirky tidbit. There was a tradition in some rural temples of letting children offer their first clay pieces to the gods. Most of them were laughably bad, but the priests would collect them and bury them near the sacred olive trees because even terrible art made in sincerity was worthy of blessing. You suspect Athena would approve, or at least smirk softly and nod once before vanishing again into her next project. A breeze drifts through the courtyard, lifting a few loose scraps of parchment and curling them along the floor like lazy tumbleweeds. On one of them is a sketch. Your sketch. Actually, you doodled it last night without realizing. Athena standing behind a mortal, not guiding his hands, but simply watching, waiting to see if he'd figure it out himself. You pick it up and tuck it away. That one's for your own kiln of memory. Somewhere nearby, a rooster crows late, indignant, and slightly off-key. Time to start a new day. You glance around and realize that the amphora contest has done something strange to the city. There are more wheels than there were yesterday. Workshops you passed on your way in quiet. Modest places have opened early. You see one potter reshaping an old design, another repainting a plain vase with fresh confidence. People are working not to win, but to understand, to try, to get their hands dirty and leave a mark worth leaving. Thune's spiral-stamped amphora is still in the shadows, but someone's added a brushstroke to it, a bird, mid-flight, awkward and charming. Then another appears, and another. Someone's turned his unfinished vessel into a community project. No one's asking permission. They're just adding what they know, trusting the next person to do the same. You pause for a long time, just watching. And this is your open scholarly debate. Was Athena's intervention in the contest meant to humble Thune, elevate the potters, or simply offer a lesson in permanence versus pride? Some argue it was a deliberate act of cultural shaping, crafting mortals into better makers. Others believe she was just bored. Either way, the world is different now. A young boy runs by holding a lopsided bowl like it's treasure. An old woman carefully stacks shards from the broken craters into a new mosaic along the wall. Even the donkey seems inspired. He's inspecting a dropped spindle like he might take up weaving. You walk back to the amphora one last time. A woman has placed a laurel wreath around its neck. Someone's added a small bowl of honey beside it, an offering. Maybe, or breakfast. Same thing, really. You reach out, gently place your fingers against the cool ceramic. It doesn't speak, but you understand it never had to. Because Athena didn't come to compete. She came to plant something in the clay, in the people, in the space between maker and meaning. And like all good myths, it grew exactly where it was least expected. The sun finally crests the rooftops, casting long, gentle fingers of light across the courtyard's worn flagstones. Shadows retreat like gossip at a temple gate, and the amphora glows again, not in a magical way, not this time, but in the way true craftsmanship always does when kissed by morning. You take one last look at it before drifting toward the city's edge. You didn't plan to stay this long. You definitely didn't plan to attend an art contest turned divine showdown. But some stories pull you in and ask you to stick around. Back through the narrow streets, you pass shuttered tavern doors opening to bleary-eyed poets. Vendors sleepily arrange grapes with the same care Athena gave to brushstrokes. And near the stoa, a new amphora has appeared on public display, not from last night's contest, but clearly inspired by it. It's unbalanced, its proportions a little wonky, but the design is daring. On its surface, Athena's owl, not painted, etched crudely, but clearly. You get your mainstream historical fact. Owl imagery wasn't just a quirky choice for Athena. It symbolized keen sight in darkness, wisdom that sees what others miss. The bird was so tied to her identity that Athenian coins often featured it. Right beside her profile, it became a shorthand for intelligence, vigilance, and just a little sass. As you lean closer to inspect the vase, you hear two passers-by debating it. One says, "It's amateurish." The other says, "It's brave." And isn't that always the split? A few steps later, you find yourself outside a small, shaded workshop. No sign, no flashy entrance, just the unmistakable sound of clay being shaped. Inside, two people argue quietly, like a low thundercloud. But it's supposed to hold wine. No. That shape tells a story. It asks something. You smile. Athena's influence lingers like incense after a festival. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some Hellenistic mystery cults, it was believed that potters had a secret role in society. Keepers of transformation. Clay was seen as a metaphor for the soul. Soft, shapeless, full of potential, but only truly defined after facing fire. You think of Thune's unfinished amphora, of the apprentice's whispered lullaby, of your own smudged fingers helping sweep up the courtyard. And it hits you, you've all been reshaped. Not dramatically, quietly, like clay left too long in the sun. You've hardened in new ways, and then, of course, Hermes shows up again. Because of course he does. He's seated on a low wall, pretending to eat a pear that keeps vanishing and reappearing in his hand. "Leaving so soon?" he asks, not looking at you. "You only just figured out the point." You arch a brow, which is, he grins. "You tell me." Then he hops down, adjusts his tunic with dramatic flair, and tosses the reappearing pear into a basket. "You're certain was empty 2 seconds ago. I'll give you this much," he says, walking beside you now. Most mortals would have just watched the contest and gone home talking about who won. You actually listened. He stops, points upward. There's a rooftop ahead, and because myth logic is at play now, you somehow know how to get there. You climb. From the top, you can see the entire city, the painted tiles, the red rooftops, the smoke spiraling from bakeries and bronze forges. And here's the astonishing part. Amphorae everywhere, on windowsills, in doorways, peeking from carts, being filled, being emptied, being used. And isn't that the truest form of art? Not to be stared at, but to be lived with. Historians still argue, Hermes says, reclining now with a view of the whole skyline, whether Athena's real power was her strategy in war or her patience in creation. But I think it's simpler. He tosses a small clay bead into the air and catches it. She knew when not to speak. You nod, watching the city wake up. Below, someone trips and drops a small amphora. It cracks, just a little. Instead of throwing it out, they gather the pieces, press them gently together, and walk on, probably to the workshop with the community kiln. Another pot, reborn. You sit in silence for a while. The kind of silence that isn't empty, it's full of meaning, layered like glazes that only shine in the right light. Then, you turn to Hermes. She never came to win. You say, he smiles. She came to remind you why you make things. And with that, he's gone. No puff of smoke. Just not there. Maybe he never was. But the rooftops are still here. The amphorae still glow. The apprentice is still painting in the dusk. And somewhere, in the hands of someone who doesn't yet know what they're capable of, a new pot takes shape. You close your eyes, not to forget, to remember differently. You descend from the rooftop, feet padding softly over sun-warmed tiles, and step back into a city still stretching its arms awake. You pass olive trees shedding early dew, hear the faint splash of someone rinsing clay bowls in the public fountain. The world is back to its usual rhythm, but you, somehow, aren't. Because now you see amphorae everywhere, not just as pots, but as witnesses, memory holders, silent participants in every mundane act, every breakfast, every argument, every offering placed with trembling hands at a household shrine. You think back to Athena's amphora the way it didn't try to impress, didn't shout, it invited, asked you to look closer, to listen between the brushstrokes. And as you pass a market stall now, you realize she's still doing it. Because right here, amid jars of lentils and baskets of figs, stands a new pot. Simple, unassuming, but painted with scenes of last night's contest. Crude, yes, but clear enough. A tall goddess beside a glowing amphora. A comically oversized man, definitely Thune, holding what appears to be a crater the size of a house. Judges in a panic. A bystander asleep in a corner. You suspect that's supposed to be you. Here comes your mainstream historical fact. In many ancient city-states, potters doubled as informal historians. Before parchment was affordable or widely available, pots told the stories. That's how we know about Theseus, about Heracles, even about less famous myths. Like the time someone tried to outbake Hestia, pottery wasn't just storage, it was storytelling. You lean in. Whoever made this new pot included something wild. Hermes tossing a fig with exaggerated flair. And there, near the base, Athena's owl, smaller than ever, as if tucked in as a joke or a blessing. That's when someone taps your shoulder. It's the girl from the courtyard, the apprentice. She's holding something in her hands, a lump of clay, still damp, still unshaped. I want to make one, she says, but not just to be pretty. I want it to mean something. You blink. That's a big ask for a lump of earth. But then again, so was the world. And look how that turned out. You nod. What's it for? She thinks. Then, a gift. For someone who doesn't know they're brave. You have no idea what story sits behind those words. But you know better than to ask. The best stories don't need explaining. They just need room. She disappears into the crowd, already molding the base between her palms. No sketch. No plan. Just hands moving like they've done this before, maybe in another life. And that's your quirky tidbit. Some potters believe that the first shape a hand ever made, be it a bowl, a cup, a figurine, revealed something about that person's soul. That's why early apprentices weren't taught how to start. They were simply handed clay and told, let it choose you. You pass a few more vendors, all buzzing with variations of the same story. She came down from Olympus. No, she was a mortal all along. The amphora still hums if you put your ear close. One man swears the goddess kissed the clay before firing it. Another claims Hermes rigged the whole thing for laughs. A third is selling owl-shaped wine flasks and winking far too often. It's the start of something new. A myth in motion, and you realize something else. The amphora is still changing people. Not just the potters, the viewers. That's your open scholarly debate for today. Some archaeologists argue that pottery's true power wasn't artistic or utilitarian, but psychological. It created stillness. It required attention. In a world of shouting oracles and warring gods, pots offered humans a place to reflect quiet, personal, unshouted meaning. You pause before the city gates, ready to step beyond them again. The road stretches long and sunlit, pebbled, and ordinary, but you feel anything but ordinary now. You've seen how myths start. They don't crash down from the sky. They grow upward. From wet clay and trembling hands, from stories painted in brushstroke so fine they ask you to lean in closer. From mistakes fired into beauty, you adjust your cloak, take a breath, and walk forward. The amphora isn't behind you, it's carried with you now, tucked in the folds of the thought, nestled in the warmth of knowing you witnessed something real. And somewhere, in a kiln far from here, a pot waits for you to shape it. The road crunches underfoot as you leave the city behind, each step a gentle nudge from the waking world into a quieter space of thought. There are fig trees ahead, fields just shy of harvest, and a distant goat chewing on a sandal it very clearly stole. You glance back once. The city still glows, not from firelight, or divine presence, or even civic pride, but from all those little changes left in Athena's wake. That amphora wasn't a conclusion. It was a beginning disguised as pottery. You keep walking, and soon, you arrive at a quiet grove near a stream. It's the kind of place that never gets painted on a vase but always should have been. Sunlight breaks through fig leaves in a dappled hush. You sit by the stream and press your fingers into the mud at its edge, just to feel it. Not clay, not yet, but close. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek potters preferred certain riverbeds, especially those with red iron-rich soil. They'd test it between their fingers, checking texture, moisture, elasticity. Entire villages sprang up around good clay sources. Even wars were fought over access to certain deposits. That's how vital the right dirt was. You wonder what Athena would have said about that. Probably something like, start with good earth, finish with clear purpose. A few bees bumble past your ear, oblivious, harmless, focused on their task. It reminds you of something Hermes said, that mortals grow best when no one's watching. Maybe that's the secret. Quiet effort over loud spectacle. You start gathering a little of the mud, not to sculpt, not yet, just to understand how it feels in your palm. Cool, soft, potential. That's when an old man appears, walking the stream's edge like he's been doing it for centuries. He carries a basket of unfinished vessels, some chipped, some still damp, some oddly shaped. He sees you with the mud and stops. You making something? He asks, not unkindly. Thinking about it, you say. He nods, then kneels and sets down one of his pots. It's small, lopsided. The paint job. Let's call it abstract. This one's mine. He says, well, was, until my grandson painted it into something else entirely. He smiles, not with regret, but with a kind of pride that folds in on itself. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some Greek families, it was tradition to pass unfinished pottery down through generations. Grandparents would start a vessel. Grandchildren would finish it. The idea was that no one piece belonged to one person. Art was a lineage, a conversation over decades. The man hands you a different pot, unfired, blank. Here, he says, for when you're ready. You look at it. Simple, unassuming, perfect. Historians still argue, he adds, whether pottery started as necessity or expression. I say both. Feed the body, speak to the soul. And just like that, he vanishes around the bend in the stream, humming something familiar. You stay in the grove a while, cradling the blank vessel like it might whisper instructions. But it doesn't, and that's okay. It's waiting. Everything is now. You think of the apprentice girl, painting bravery into clay, of Thune's spiral amphora, growing like a mosaic of mistakes and second chances, of Athena's owl, peeking from the bottom of every pot made with more heart than ego. Maybe the gods don't care about perfection. Maybe they care about participation. A breeze drifts in, drying your hands. You set the vessel beside you and trace a line in the dirt. Not a shape, just a curve. A beginning. You might never sculpt something that ends up in a temple. You might never win a contest or paint a scene that makes people weep. But if you make something honestly, you're part of the myth. That's the secret Athena left behind, not in words, but in clay. Make it with care. Let it carry meaning. Let someone else pick it up one day and say, ah, I know this shape. I know what they were trying to say. You smile, And for the first time all day, you don't think of the amphora. You think of the next one. The next one doesn't come immediately. It lingers like a song you half remember close, but not quite touchable. Days pass, and you walk across ridges scorched golden by the sun, through groves where olives hang like patient punctuation, past towns too small for maps but rich in stories painted onto walls and whispered behind bread stalls. You carry that small, blank vessel the old man gave you. It's wrapped in linen, tucked carefully into your satchel. You don't look at it often, but you feel it. It has a kind of presence, like it's waiting not for hands, but for readiness. In one dusty town, a woman invites you to dinner after overhearing you mention clay. She teaches children how to throw pots, not in a formal school, just in the cool shade behind her house. She asks if you've ever fired a kiln. You shake your head. She laughs. That's where the soul shows up. Not in the shaping, in the burning. And that's your mainstream historical fact. Greek kilns were marvels of ancient engineering. 2 chambers, one for fire, one for vessels. Temperatures reached over 900 degrees, controlled by manipulating vents and stacking methods. Firing wasn't just a step, it was a trial. Clay transformed from pliable to permanent only by enduring the flame. You try your hand at it later that evening, not your own pot. You're not ready, but someone else's. A humble bowl. You help stack it. Feel the heat lick at your shins. Watch the flames curl like dancers around each vessel. It's terrifying and beautiful. You sit beside the kiln all night, not out of duty, out of reverence. You understand now why some potters whispered prayers to their kilns, why they gave names to the fire. It wasn't superstition, it was relationship. Someone hands you a mug of water. A teenager, one of the students. He's quiet for a long time before asking, "Did you really see Athena's amphora?" You nod. He grins, then leans in and whispers, "I'm going to make one better." There it is again, the echo. Not envy, not arrogance, just bold belief, a ripple from the goddess's brush still moving outward. That night, you dream of the amphora again, but this time, it's unfinished. Brushes float in the air, paint shift like mist. The owl waits, half drawn. Athena herself isn't present, but something is. Something that watches, that hopes. You wake up with your hands already reaching for your satchel. Time. At last, you unwrap the small, blank pot, the one the old man gave you by the stream. It's dry now, a little cracked, but whole. Your fingertips settle naturally on its sides. You don't need a design. You just begin. A curl here, a shape there. You don't try to impress. You just try to be honest. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some Orphic traditions, it was believed that if you poured wine into a vessel painted with falsehoods, it would sour instantly. But a pot made in truth, no matter how ugly, would sweeten even water. Truth and form were inseparable. To deceive in design was to invite rot. So you paint what's true. Not gods or battles, not amphorae floating in fire. Just hands, so many hands, reaching, making, mending. You paint Thune's spiral imperfect and endearing. The apprentice's owl, Hermes's fig, which, admittedly, looks more like a pear, but close enough. The courtyard, the child's inscription. Please don't be mad. The kiln's glow, a sleeping potter curled beside their tools. And on the other side, with a brushstroke as soft as breath, a single line curving forward. Not a symbol, not a shape. Just potential. Historians still argue. Someone murmurs nearby, maybe in your memory, maybe in your heart. Whether the great works of art are born from divine inspiration or human persistence, you know the answer now. It's both. Because the gods may nudge, but you must choose to shape. You let the pot dry, then help stack it into the next firing. You don't watch this time. You walk away before it begins, because now you know it's not about seeing the flame. It's about trusting what you put into it. The road ahead winds gently now, less of a destination, more of a rhythm. You no longer hurry. The journey is the point. The people you meet, the fragments of clay under your sandals, the lazy amphorae resting by village fountains. They all feel like pages in a slow-moving book that Athena, in her eternal patience, is still writing, and you're somewhere in the margins. Happily so. In a coastal town where the sea sighs against salt-worn docks, you find something unexpected. A shrine not to Athena, not to Zeus or Apollo, but to an amphora. That's it. No inscription, no temple, just a niche carved into a seawall where an old, cracked vessel sits surrounded by pebbles and flowers. You ask around. A fisherman shrugs. That pot saved my boat once. He says, dead serious. Plugged a hole long enough for us to get back. Another woman adds, people tell it their problems now. Whisper into it. Some say it echoes back. And that brings us to your mainstream historical fact. Vessels, especially amphorae, were often repurposed in ancient life. Once they cracked or were no longer fit for transport, they became grain storage. Plant pots, baby urns, even burial jars. No such thing as single use. The Greeks saw the beauty in reuse with purpose. You approach the shrine later that evening, alone. There's a hush to it, a respect earned not by miracle but by usefulness. And you do whisper something into the amphora, if only because, why not? You lean close, lips barely touching the rim. Thank you, you murmur, for waiting until I was ready. The wind stirs, nothing echoes back. But you don't need it to. You sit nearby for a while, watching the tide. And here comes your quirky tidbit. In some fishing villages, children were told that the sea could speak through broken pots. If a cracked amphora washed ashore, you were meant to listen for stories in the way it breathed with the waves. Those who heard nothing. Too loud in the head, the elders said. You lean your ear to the pot. It doesn't breathe, but it does feel warm. Not from the sun. From use. From memory. Later, a small boy runs up to you with clay-streaked hands. You're the one who saw the goddess's pot. He asks, like it's a challenge. You nod. Slowly. He holds up his own creation. It's misshapen. It's delightful. It's painted with something that might be a fish or a dog wearing armor. She came to my dream, he says matter-of-factly. Told me to make stuff. Said it doesn't matter what. Just do it. You crouch and examine his pot seriously. Looks like it could hold something important. He beams. I'm gonna fill it with sea glass. Perfect. You remember what Hermes said, that Athena doesn't speak loudly. She nudges, she waits, she lets mortals find meaning in the making. And meaning is everywhere now. Even in fish dogs, even in a pot that once plugged a sinking boat. Historians still argue. A passing scholar mutters over his scroll whether the cult of the vessel was truly religious or simply sentimental nonsense. You just smile, because what is faith, really, if not the belief that what you make, what you touch matters? That night, the town holds a feast by the docks. Clay lamps flicker on every table. Children pass around little pots filled with olives, figs, and honey. One amphora, newly painted, is placed at the center like a guest of honor. You don't ask whose it is. You already know it belongs to everyone. You stay until the lamps burn low, until the sea hushes even the loudest songs, and before sleep claims you. You whisper again into the old pot by the seawall. Not a prayer, not a question. Just, I'll keep going. And somewhere far away in a grove, in a kiln, in the curve of a hand reaching towards something yet unmade, Athena smiles. You wake to gulls arguing overhead and a breeze soft as memory brushing across your face. The sea is lower now, calm and silver in the morning light, and the town slowly exhales the last of its festival dreams. Your satchel feels lighter, not because the pot is gone, no, it's still there. But something else has shifted. Some weight you didn't know you'd been carrying. The pressure to prove, the anxiety of not having the right shape, the right stroke, the perfect origin story. You stand and stretch, bones creaking like the hull of a weathered boat. Then you begin walking again, back inland, through olive groves and half-sung paths where no one remembers who planted the first tree. Villages bloom and fade around you like painted backdrops. Every few hours, you spot another vessel, one used as a bird bath, another as a base for a fence post, a third cracked and serving as a trough for goats. Each one lives on. And here's your final mainstream historical fact. Archaeologists often find broken amphorae reused in the foundations of homes, in cisterns, in garden terraces. The Greeks didn't discard, they reimagined. Pottery wasn't just art, it was infrastructure. It became the bones of everyday life. You pass a hillside school where children are practicing brush strokes with their fingers. No tools yet. A young woman gently guides them, saying, "First, we learn to shape, then we learn to tell the truth." And you know now that's it. That's the lesson. Clay is just the medium, the myth is the message. Farther on, you stop beside a field where potters have begun arranging shattered vessels into a wall mosaic. Each shard still holds color, shape, a memory of intention. Together, they make something entirely new, imperfect, uneven, and breathtaking. One child points at a piece and says, "That was my papa's first pot. He dropped it." You nod, still telling stories, though, and the child grins. You find a shard of your own small, curved, with a faded image of an owl and press it gently into the mosaic. There, a signature, a promise. Now for your quirky tidbit. In some ancient rituals, it was believed that breaking a pot at the right moment could release wisdom trapped inside it. The Greeks even had a word for the sound of cracking clay, crambo, and some said it echoed into the underworld, delivering messages to forgotten gods. So maybe your little shard has a message now. We heard her. Back on the path, you pass a familiar figure lounging under a fig tree. Hermes. Naturally, he's humming off-key and balancing 3 fig seeds on the back of his hand. "You done?" he asks without looking up. You shrug. "Maybe, maybe not." He smirks. "She'll like that answer." You sit beside him. Say nothing for a while. Just breathe. Finally, why did she paint the amphora? He pops a fig seed into his mouth. Why does anyone? You nod. You already know. You rise again, the path curling forward like an unfired coil pot full of promise, full of unshaped story. The final open scholarly debate floats into your mind. Historians still argue whether myths shape behavior or merely reflect it. Was Athena's amphora a divine intervention, or a mirror held up to mortal possibility? You smile. Because at this point, it doesn't matter. The myth is alive now, and you helped carry it. You reach into your satchel and touch the pot one last time, still whole, still humble, still full of questions. You don't need answers anymore. Just the shape of trying. Just the memory of clay. Just the silence of a goddess who knew exactly when to step back. Now, slow your breath. The road is behind you. The amphora rests cool, finished. Still, you've wandered far tonight. Through sunlit groves and shadowed kilns, you've heard clay whisper, watched brushes dance, and felt the gentle nudge of a goddess who didn't need applause to leave a mark. Her amphora wasn't about victory. It was about intention. Let that settle in your bones. Let your body soften. Like clay before the wheel, there's no pressure to shape anything now. No need to impress, or explain, or perform. Just rest. You've already done the hard work. You showed up. You listened. You let the myth reshape you. Let your shoulders drop. Let the kiln grow dark and cool. Let your thoughts slow, like a potter's wheel, easing to stillness. In this quiet space, you are the vessel now, full of story, full of potential. Even if you never paint it, even if you never throw another pot, you remember, you understand, that's enough. Athena would be proud not because you created something flawless, but because you tried, because you cared, because you made room for meaning. So close your eyes now. The brushes are rinsed. The kiln is quiet. The owl watches from her perch. Content. You did well. Sleep easy. Maker of meaning. Tomorrow, there will be more stories, but for now, rest.